close for those Dallas teams. Remember Alvin Harper, the wide receiver.
Yes.
Dixon Edwards, the linebacker. Just guys getting paid and paid and paid because they played with Hall of Famers. And, I kind of see a lot of that with Paul Kruger. Not that he's not a legitimate NFL player, because he certainly is. But when I look at him versus Sheard, I would rather have, I would rather have the other guy in there. But of course, again, we talk about resume, we talk about pedigree, and in the case of Kruger, even though actually Sheard was a higher draft pick, was certainly a better prospect coming into the NFL, certainly more athletic. Then when you win a Super Bowl and you perform well in that sort of run, you get the big contract, and that becomes the pedigree in that type of instance. Even I think the other guy's the better player.
I'm telling you, I think they just got a thing about they got to play Kruger because, like they're even talking about running some five linebacker stuff where you got like that rover linebacker out there that's blitzing. And
that's fine too, and I like that because I think that's the way the NFL's going. You always hear these 3-4-4-3 designations. Basically few and certainly the innovative defensive coaches. Really, those things are misnomers now. Because you have multiple fronts. Most teams will go from a 3-4 to a 4-3 and back and forth, and some use, 3 defensive linemen, as you said. You could see 5 linebackers. You could see 3 safeties at times. A lot of different formations from the more innovative defensive coaches. So when people talk about a 3-4 or a 4-3, unless you're playing a Tampa 2, and very few teams play that anymore. It's kind of an outdated label.
And you know what? That's kind of what I dig Mike Pettine's defensive philosophy. You got to have the right horses to do it. But I like where he talks about having a defense where you teach everybody's role so that at any time, somebody could blitz from somewhere, and it's just impossible for the other team to know because somebody fills that gap. But it's a great philosophy, and if you've got a team full of talented guys that can do it, it sounds unstoppable, But that's the thing I worry about is you do have to have the right guys, not just physically, but with the right football IQ to know if I'm the safety and I've got to replace this linebacker because he's going to blitz, then who's he covering? And if you've got the right football IQ, I do like the philosophy of Mike Pettine's defense.
Yeah, and that's the second part of it. Obviously, is Mike Pettine's the head coach, and he's a defensive guy. And if you look at what Buffalo did last year, even though obviously it wasn't a very good team defensively, they made a lot of plays. I think they led the NFL in sacks. So it's very high pressure defense. So that aspect of it you like. But again, it's the unproven nature of basically everyone on that staff that concerns me, especially coming off a year where you had so much experience at the coordinator positions.
Absolutely. You're listening to The Sports Fix. We're talking to my man, John McMullen from the Sports Network. I guess last question, big question here. Josh Gordon, 2 weeks have gone by. We're not much further than we were before. They've had the appeal. Now, 1 to 3 week delay. There's talks of suing the NFL and settlements, but nothing official. Where are you at on this? Where do you think it ends up? Because I was talking yesterday about the lawsuit aspect, and I'm like, look, that's breaking some precedents that you don't want, and I know the NFL doesn't want it either because you never know what can happen in a court. You never know which way things can go, and there's a reason that people settle because you can always lose, even if you think it's 100% lock. And so there's a lot of moving parts there. Where do you see this thing going?
Well, I don't think, the legal aspect of it's a legitimate way to go for Josh Gordon simply because, remember, it's collectively bargained, the policy. We've talked about it numerous times. Courts are very, very, wary to overturn collectively bargained arbitration. They don't do it. So While it would kind of delay things and enable Josh Gordon to at least be on the field at some point for this season, there's a theory that's the way to go. I wrote extensively, if people remember the Star Caps episode where guys like Kevin Williams, Pat Williams, Will Smith were suspended. There's a perfect indication. Yes. They sued the NFL, and the NFL was wrong. There was no question about it. It was an over-the-counter supplement that had a diuretic on it, in it, and the NFL knew about it and didn't inform its players. So in essence, what the NFL was doing was playing a form of gotcha to catch certain players so they could point to the public and say, look, we're trying to clean up this game. The lawyers in that particular case, the judge in that particular case, lambasted the NFL. You can go online, you could read his ruling, destroyed the NFL verbally and their behavior. And at the end of the day, he still sided with them because the players collectively bargained. He was not willing to overturn collectively bargained arbitration. So the end game, Josh Gordon's never going to be able to win a legal challenge at the end of the day. Again, he could hold things off for a while, but he's not going to win. To me, the base comes down to this, and the fact that win, lose, or draw, and I could certainly see this suspension being knocked down from 16 games to, say, 8. I think that's the most likely, that's the best case scenario for Josh Gordon this season. But you have to remember, that still means Josh Gordon is in stage 3 of the NFL's testing program. That still means he can be tested 10 times a month. And this is a guy who's shown no indication that he thinks he needs help or wants help or anything of that nature. So even if he understands in his camp, and I get what they're trying to do because there's a lot of money on the table, and I certainly understand it, but at the end of the day, he's going to be in the same position. And he's going to have to pass these 10 tests a month. And is he going to be able to do that in the long term? So it's completely in his court. Obviously, if he gets it down to 8 games, and this is the wake up call for him, who knows? Maybe he can go on and do great things. But that's the way I read it, and the fact that it's not going to change his long term future. And that's the fact that this is a guy, for the rest of his NFL career, is going to have to pass those 10 tests a month. And unless he gets help, I don't see how he's ever going to be able to do that.
And I think that's the one thing that really gets overlooked in all of this is whether what you just said, whether he sits out a year, whether he sits out 8 games, it doesn't matter what it is. He still is always 1 test away from being gone. And so that's the one thing I think that gets overlooked in all of it. Like, especially now, people are fired up thinking, oh, he might get this thing down. We might get him back. But that's all fine and well. He could get this thing knocked down to 1 game. And if he pees dirty next week, it's all over. It doesn't matter. He could get this thing knocked down to nothing. They could go, we're sorry, Josh Gordon. By the way, pee in the cup for us. And if he comes up dirty, he's done no matter what. So, and this thing, what do you expect? I mean, they're talking multiple weeks. Now, we talked about this in the offseason. If the appeal drags on, he has now put next year's training camp in jeopardy if he was to be suspended for a full year, right? Because he would miss, it would have to go 12 months. So let's say it's 2 weeks before they announce something. He would have to miss the first month of training camp next year, right?
I think it's game related, so I think it would be the 16 games. So I don't think that aspect of it has much of a bearing.
Okay, I thought it was calendar.
It's not like Justin Blackmon is suspended indefinitely. So basically, after this year, he'll have to go to the commissioner and apply for reinstatement, and then things go from there. As far as the stages of the 4, the 6, the 8, it goes with regular season games. So you'll see guys right now who are, already suspended for 2 or 4 games in a regular season. Guys like Ray Rice, Lane Johnson, they're able to practice at training camp. They're able to play in preseason games, and then once the regular season starts, they're out. In Ray Rice's case, for the 2 games, Lane Johnson for 4 games. And they're not able to be at the practice facility. They're not able to go to meetings. They're not able to be with the team. So it's all game related. So in essence, when you say a year, it just means the 16 games for Josh Gordon. Or in his case, I think the most likely scenario would be if it gets knocked down, it'll get knocked down to 8 games.
Now, when you say knocked down, help me clarify this. All this talk about a settlement, but there's no telling yet which way the arbitrator is going to rule. Like, what is this settlement talk? If we're not talking about a lawsuit, then what settlement talk would there be? I mean, is the NFL even talking about this, or is this just people making up news stories to talk about? Because if I'm the NFL, I'm just going, hey, whatever my arbitrator says, that's what it is. What reason would I negotiate a settlement with Josh Gordon if I was the NFL?
Well, the one thing that has worked in the past for certain players is testing issues. It worked for Richard Sherman,
Yep.
who have had objections toward the actual testing procedures, and that has worked in the past because the testers themselves have done things that they weren't supposed to do, and it's there's no question it's a wink way of beating it. There's no question Richard Sherman tested positive when he did, but he was able to get things knocked down. Brandon Browner, same type of situation, where he was actually out of the NFL when he missed his test, playing up in Canada. So they've shown an indication. They've shown the league I'm talking about in the past have listened to players, concerns with all the bad rap that they get at times and the bad reputation they have. They have listened to players' concerns in the past and lowered penalties. And that's what I think you're talking about. Other people have used the term settlement. I think that's an incorrect term in this situation, certainly incomplete at the bare minimum. I don't think they'll be settling. I think they will be listening and saying if they have some concerns and they believe some of what Josh Gordon was saying, I think they could lower the suspension. I think that's a possibility. But it wouldn't be a settlement as far as the legal sense of the word, because it is up to the arbitrator, and the arbitrator can come back and say, nope, NFL's right, you're suspended for a year. And he's still going to say that, but the league itself could knock down the penalty. They would not be saying settling in a legal sense because they have to. The league has all the control here, and that's unfortunately what the players have collectively bargained. That's what I brought up in the Star Caps example. Even if the NFL's wrong, they have the power.
And I'll tell you what, when I was talking to somebody last night, and this is kind of what I've told people par for the course, I think if my gut says they don't make any changes, it's going to be what it is. But if they did, I could see, like you said, if you split it in half, if you win 8 games, but I don't think it's a flat. I think that, especially if the arbitrator rules, like you said, even though they agree to less, the arbitrator's ruling is what it is. It's almost like when a judge gives you that suspended sentence over your head where, it's a year. We're going to let you sit out 8 games. You got to do this, this, and this to get, to be able to come back in week 8. And then if he does that and he passes all of his tests and all of that, then he's reinstated for the second half of the season. I could see it coming with some qualifications,
Yeah, and the bigger aspect of it is what we said. You still have to keep passing those tests, and they're going to be there. And if you're playing fast and loose with the truth, and I'm not saying that's what Josh Gordon is doing, but history is history, and
yes,
you're still going to have to pass the test. And if you're not acknowledging there's a problem, and there is a problem, it's a win today is not going to necessarily mean all that much, and I put that term in quotations, win.
No, and actually,
it's not going to mean all that much unless you turn your life around.
in actuality, a win today could be a loss tomorrow, even worse, because the more of a break they cut you now, the more the backside of that slaps you if you do mess up and get there. We did cut you slack, and then we cut you slack again. You know what I mean? So you could end up, losing instead of winning, like you said. Last question, and I think this depends on